So, yeah, without further ado, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to open this proposition. Here.
Having been debate for the last 4 years, I've gotten a lot of time to watch a lot more sports. And so, doing so, I've understood the rules of soccer a lot more. And I think a specific nuance that OG misses in this debate is the fact that the Caps are on the starting lineup, right? A lot of our argumentation on national representation or having people from your league or people from your city being represented and seeing them win is quite value neutral, because if they're on the team like Real Madrid or if they're on Team England and they still win, then you can still say that people on your team have won. Their response to this is to say something like, well, they're not in the starting lineup, it'd be a lot better if they already were. In which case I would agree. Most teams would probably want it so that they have people from their own nationalities in their starting lineup and then win, right? But the fact of the reality is that this doesn't happen, right? So we have to ask ourselves why this doesn't happen and why we think this is so, and which is more important. We think the reason why we think it doesn't happen is because you just have better players from other places, right? A lot of players are able to contribute unique things to your team that the players domestically are not able to. Right, so you're able to get a player from Uruguay, you're able to get a player from Brazil who's able to play the game beautifully. You're able to get a player from Germany who's able to be a massive fucking tank. And so all of these roles are actually fulfilled in our type of house. And because of the synergies that are achieved between players from different countries and players that play different roles, well, that's how you're able to win, and that's how you made the game far more entertaining than you only get inside opposition. What does the world look like on a government bench? Sure, you probably get the five best players or goalie strikers or whatnot from your team. But then, if they work together like quite mid, or they don't learn that much from each other because they have the same upbringing, they have the same background, they have the same coaches, then what does that bring to your sport? I don't think it elevates the game. I think it just makes it a lot more monotone. Before I move on.
Why on earth would I care if this made the synergies on one team where sports are 0-sum in terms of competition? It's not any less entertaining to have different playing styles.
I think it's specific. I think it probably is. It's one of the values of why people love watching Brazilian soccer so much or Uruguay soccer so much. It's because of the style and the style and the tricks that people are able to do. And that's also the main critique of soccer right now. I don't know if you guys have the time to watch soccer, but I specifically do. And so a lot of people are saying there's less emphasis in style, there's less emphasis in the game. It's now more about just passing and now more about goals. And so the viewership has died down and people have been dissuaded from watching the sport a lot now. On our side, you're able to give a lot more beauty and a lot more uniqueness to the game, which is what people view soccer for and what real soccer players and real soccer fans watch. First argument on why we think it's better for the individual players. Opening government comes here and says that it's better for individual players because when you have to field the 5 best players from your team, you have more opportunities and greater incentive to develop them. One, we think that teams already have an incentive to develop amateur players, which is why, for example, Barcelona has team 2 and 3, same as Real Madrid and other teams that exist, right? They don't argue on the margin and say why that incentive is a lot higher in their study house. We think it exists nonetheless. Then they give the example of amateur leagues, right? They say that amateur leagues are more likely to be funded on their study house because I actually don't really know why, but I think it's value neutral because amateur leagues is created because out of fun of the sport, right? So people in Germany, people in England love the sport so much, they create amateur leagues, Sunday leagues, or leagues around their city. So we think on either side, those will help. And they say, but there's a greater incentive, right? What does this greater incentive look like? Is it better coaching? Is it more fields? I think on our side, it has, because people see soccer as a game for fun, they already have the incentive set in place to probably get the best coaches to coach them so that they're better than everyone else. There's no analysis for why there's something that's exclusive on their side of the house. What is the analysis for our side, and why do we think it's better why do we think it's worse off for individual players if they have this cap? It is worse off for these players because they'll be forced to face against mature teams prematurely, and that means you probably that just kills your drive and kills your dream to win because now you just think you're shit. When in reality, you're just deployed prematurely because there's no one else to help you there's no one else to help your team get up to speed. There's no one else there to help guide you because you just don't have those players anymore because of this starting lineup cap. Second argument, why we think this worsens football as a whole. Let's look at this. Let's look at it this way, right? Like why I said a while ago, the characterization of football is that people have to be deployed practically into specific positions. But now that you have the cap, there are only so many great strikers that come from your league. There are only so many great goalkeepers and only so many great wingers that come from your country. What this leads to is that it creates a massive bidding war for the best players in your country, the best players in your league. And that means they're able to do things like demand higher salaries or demand specific things that impact the sport as a whole. So they're able to demand certain coaches. They're able to mandate certain playing styles that other people might not be comfortable with, but because you need the best player in your team, you're just forced to like abide by like their demands and push forward with it. Why is this bad? This is bad because the beautiful game of football no longer becomes a game of everyone that everyone enjoys. It becomes a game of one man and one man alone. And I don't know how that really helps with the whole idea of I don't know how it really helps with this whole idea of inspiring people to play more. When football just becomes a game of you have to be the absolute best or you're some guy's bitch on the field, right? I don't think that's something really inspiring. I probably want to play some other game like basketball or just leave the country, the United States. So we think that because when you give these players so much leverage and so much power over the team, you're far more likely to do things. And so that's just one impact. The second impact is because these players have so much power in the team, you're more likely to do things like you still play them even if they're injured. You still play them even if that's not the best decision tactically. So this also impacts one of the arguments that OG makes, that if you're forced to play this best player in the team, even if he's injured, even if it's not the best tactically, then they're just on a probability level just more likely to lose that match, and therefore you're less likely to have like just more wins for your team, and as a result more losses. Which just following the analysis from OG, which means less support and less fervor for your team. This happens specifically because these players know that these teams need them so much. These teams need them so much because there's no other alternative. The other impact of this is just money, right? Individual players have salary caps in which players are now able to like extract more money from these teams and make it so they're less likely to invest in other like junior talent, or less likely to invest in other players in the team, which probably means you get shittier players in other roles that are deemed as not important. But it also means you probably have less money to like fund like the amateur league or your second or your third league or your academic lineup. Sorry, not your academy lineup, not academic lineup. So for all these reasons, because we explained to you the nuance of how this creates a bidding war and how that leads to the worst game and how it makes it so that people are dissuaded from watching soccer because they think it's a farce and nothing that they love, we are very proud to oppose this motion.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that excellent speech. Call upon the next member of the proposition here.
So just because I noticed that some people were very enthusiastic about POIing Max, I will definitely accept you. So you can give me like 10 POIs if you would like, but rest assured you don't have to. I will take you. The difference between watching a team that you support and care about because they're just someone you've followed for a while, and a team that you support and care about, and also is filled with players who are important, who are behind the success of your team, and you speak the same language and came from your own borough is immense. That transforms sport from something that's just fun and important to you to something that gives you a sense of pride in yourself, in your country, and gives you more hope for the future. That's what's so important. We place these kind of domestic players at the heart of every team. Before I go on to the two main clashes of the debate, let me just first identify what OO's cute little effort to be like, aha, what OO team is this, and we watch sports and they don't, actually is able to achieve. Because it is true that there are already some quotas that for domestic players right now. There are two obvious differences that this motion creates, though. The first thing is like having them be starting members means that the fate of your team is tied much more closely to your domestic players, so they can't just be an afterthought that's tacked on to fulfill a requirement, check a box, which, by the way, is really patronizing and often damaging if it's the case that the people who actually look like you are just relevant to the team. But number two also means that you're able to do things to make sure that these players are much more visible and therefore have a bigger speaking position in interviews, for example, and are more the face and the brand of the team as well. But I think that even if I step aside from the fact that this also minimizes their own case, I also just want to observe what exactly their harms actually are of this observation, because their harms seem to be just two things. The first is that this disrupts team synergies and leads to worse performances, and two, that this gives some players an enormous amount of control over the team's success overall and leads to unfair dynamics within the team. Two sets of responses. The first thing is I want to observe just how symmetric the second main claim about imbalances actually is, because it's not true that being a domestic player makes a huge difference, because on either side, wanting to attract the best Brazilian player to Europe, for example, also creates a huge asymmetry in power. I think what we're able to crucially do, though, is we balance things out a bit, because you're not just trying to attract the best Brazilian player, you also want to ensure that the domestic players are good as well. So if anything, it balances things out and means that players, that owners are trying to please different players. But number two, the other big thing is just note how short-term their actual impact is. Because yeah, sure, there are some disruptions right now, but this is something that universally applies to teams across the board, but also isn't even a bad thing. Because when teams are trying to adapt to changing your players, for example, where there's a lot of speculation, you reward teams that are able to better adapt to these changes, which often is also very equalizing, because teams that are smaller, more lightweight, more willing to take risks and experiment, are also those which are often poor and are less well established, which means that you have underdog stories that inspire people for decades to come. For those reasons, I think O's case really is a win for our side. Two main clashes then. The first thing is about equality within football and what Max told you about how this creates better chances across teams between the European League in general, also within these for every single country. The first and biggest claim we told you was that this is really, really good for local development, right? Because when internal leagues have a bunch of money, so the first one I just established is that internal leagues have a lot of money, and there's no shortage in interest in paying for teams or investing in teams in all countries. And the reason for this is because there are a lot of rich people in the world who dick around and have a lot of cash to do things with. And some of them decide to try and maximize this money endlessly, but many of them want to do interesting things with this money. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys are also male, and there is a correlation between masculinity and being I should be into sports, and I should contribute to sports in general. And what that means is people often throw their excess money into these kinds of things. Crucially, note that there's actually a redistributive effect of this kind of desire to invest, just because if you want to invest in Slovenia, for example, or another smaller European country, there's a lower price to trying to pay for good players, because the cost of the currency pay power, your dollar goes further in a small country than a big one. Also because the possible upside of your investment is also larger, because if you're just one additional investor in a really established team, the additional contribution you can make is small, as opposed to possibly redefining the prospects of a team for the future, and people are willing to take that risk. So for those reasons, there are people who are willing to invest deeply in disadvantaged circles on our side. The main change that Max and I show you that happens as a result of requiring domestic players in the starting lineup is that the success then becomes more deeply tied towards the availability of strong players within the domestic circuit itself, which means that if you want to make this country better off, you don't just buy other players from existing strong football circuits, you build within the country itself, you create more academies, you scout more aggressively, you do things that make the number of opportunities for football players to succeed within disadvantaged countries better. That's really, really good, because football is obviously a huge source source of social mobility for people who can't do it in school because their public schools are fucked, for example. Also because it's a very, very inspiring story that if a player succeeds, every single poor person who enjoys football and comes from that country now feels that that's the kind of fighting spirit that they themselves can embody and relate to and aspire towards, even if they themselves don't play football. So for those reasons, I think we create massive benefits. The incentive we get, the response we get from OO is like, well, you already have like an incentive to train and improve, but like one, yes, but we have it more. But number two, because this becomes exclusive to trying to have it within smaller disadvantaged countries, which you didn't properly address. I'll take a POI from either or to you.
Yeah, so you say that this equalizes chances within a country's league, but surely if they're all bidding for the same pool of national players, the richest teams will just get the best players.
So what Max and I are telling you, like the entire point of my last 3 minutes was to tell you that there is no you're not just allowed to have like 20 good players per country, and then it's like a bidding war to increase them. Like if you run out of good players, you try to make more good players. Like the timeline for football is extremely long. It's a sport that's been around for a really, really long time. We're going to wait 10, 20, 30 years for some talents to rise up and do really, really well. The other mech I'm going to give you, though, is I think that even assuming that it is static and we can't have better local development, we are equalizing because we squeeze out good players from the UK or from Germany who are oversaturated with really, really good players right now. And that's good because when they join smaller countries, even a B-tier player can dramatically improve the prospect of another team because they inject something fresh and new to this other club or make them excited about what they can do now, for example. Crucially, this is on net good because these really strong players have diminishing marginal returns when they're in Germany, we're in the UK, for example, because there is already an oversupply of them. So for those reasons, we create more quality within football and more excitement and inspiration for that reason as well. Finally, I just want to really quickly observe that on our side, we encourage countries to attract players, to allow players from other countries to become citizens of our country as well. This disproportionately benefits people from Africa, people from South America, and I think that the impact of this is also that people watching feel like these players are more part of their own country and its contributions towards a more diverse perception of European states. It's a very, very good thing. Very happy to propose.
Thank you, Speaker, for your excellent speech. Call upon the next member of the opposition.
Yeah.
It is on.
Does that window open?
We can find out. Thank you.
That works in some things.
Heroes are not born, they are made. We're going to create a new generation of football stars, which is what opening government fails to do. First argument about why we're going to create star talent. Opening opposition is broadly correct that the incentive to do the level of coaching and expansion that opening government wants broadly already exists. People still do talent recruitment, people still want to be able to create local amateur leagues, and the cost of these things is not particularly high. So why is there a meaningful comparative on the development of players on our side? That's a question that opening government unfortunately failed to answer, meaning that in terms of player development, they unfortunately failed to achieve a meaningful effect. Right now, rich investors, who by the way, I think are overwhelming, one private equity rejection is not enough to offset like a broad trend within football, don't invest in academies. But not the issue isn't that they just don't invest in academies. They don't invest in the best, most necessary types of academies for creating star players. That is to say, these are ones that, for example, do things like cloud analytics, more detailed medical analyses of people's things like stride strength and running speed, doing things like being able to improve your reaction time on the margin against other very good star players. Why don't they do this? First, because it is very expensive. It doesn't give you short-term returns to invest in lots and lots of, for example, medical staff and expensive training facilities. It doesn't increase the immediate value of the portfolio of your club. It takes a very, very long time. It's a very high upfront cost. It's hard to convince other investors who are buying up your club of the value of these things when you could have just bought another player to offset the spec to begin with. Second, like we already said, it's easy for you to spend out of this problem right now by dispatching the best talent from elsewhere using your wallets. But third, you have additional liability associated with this, more risk in the investment where it might not come to fruition, more employees that you're now employing. There's a lot more liability associated with this process, so you would rather not do this if you didn't have the option. There's no reason in status quo for you to put money towards the best candidate training academies. Now they do put money there. Why? First, because to some degree I do think it's your only option. You need stars, they are domestic, you're constrained. Second, risk aversion. That is that if you are Chelsea, you do not want to lose your dominance. You are now in a risky position which you were not before, where you were previously able to win using your star players, but now you have lost the dearth of the people who were able to be your best. And so now the ability to create them, the stars, is only created on our side of the house, where you're able to do that, and the incentive is in this risk aversion. But third, dynasty creation. You created this dynasty using your money, right? And now you want to be able to sustain that, because the way that you pulled in investment, the way that you were able to pull in money for creating that new stadium that you now need to offset the money for the loans on, all of that cost was done through the fact that you were the dominant team, the top of the league, the one who's always making the Champions League final. You have now lost that in 3 years. How do you fix this problem? The only way that you can fix it is by putting in the necessary money into the most advanced kinds of training infrastructure that can allow for you to win on the margins and give value to these kinds of players. Why is this good? First of all, let's say how actually you have improvements at the top level of football. You have to break through important plateaus that happen. It's micro improvements in the margin of professional sport, where if everybody is good, the margin between what separates the good and the excellent is absolutely tiny. It's like in F1, how a tenth of a second separates the good from the champions. That kind of thing is essential. And this is what responds to Amanav's claim about trickle in. Maybe players do come to warm the benches at Man United, but they never go onto the pitch because they plateau. And for a manager, the risk aversion of a team on the verge of not qualifying for the Champions League, putting them on the pitch, is not something that you would ever take. And so that is why you're going to do this now on our side of the house. These people now exist. More of the players who are just short of becoming stars are able to go from young ages and get far better, far faster, because of the fact that you're putting this money there where you didn't before. Second, you maximize them a lot more because you have better coaching staff and you put more money into this. You don't lead them down the wrong path anymore when you're trying to improve your reaction time without realizing that that wasn't the problem. It's the difference between having a good, okay, or great coach and having someone who's fucking excellent. But third, now that we have better players on net within the league because these people are also being traded, it means that there's more entertaining and more tightly contested leagues as these things are going to spill out across the things. But finally, there's a lot of economies of scale here, right? As more clubs are investing into these things, these pull down the cost because there's expensive fixed costs to begin with. This infrastructure probably trickles down to some degree. The staff trickles down to getting your job offer from the smaller club. The old infrastructure is picked up by older clubs, and that's what is able to create the change we talk about. This is the method of player recruitment that is actually improved and was absent prior to this. This is the change in star creation that's created by the mission. Second argument on less time, second way that this happens is by spending less time on the benches. Which is that yes, you may have had these players before, but you no longer force them to do so anymore. not locally, but also not internationally, where these people were previously not perceived as good enough. This means that you no longer have older players who are slowing down, but still you think have the magic in them, like Wayne Rooney in 2018, continually being on the pitch for England. These players get on the pitch faster now because you're able to show the marginal improvement that makes you believe that they're good enough. Not only is this first good for them because of the valuable match experience that they have in high pressure situations that they can then go and bring back to their clubs and future international games, but second, they play more in their prime while they're young instead of having to wait until Wayne Rooney fucking retires. This is more image value, more time in the spotlight that allows you to get more sponsorship revenue. All of these things are likely to improve far more. I might be right that Kylian Mbappe gets through the side, but only Mbappe gets through. Anyone less slips through the cracks, which is what we fixed. Second claim, why do we make small teams far better? Max has this one liner on this that says you shrink the talent pool that allows small teams to get an advantage. But I really just don't think that that is able to do enough to show you why these small towns are getting through. First of all, loan agreements are used far more by small teams in the process of getting the people downwards from the bigger teams to give them match experience. This knowledge transfer that they have of being in a big team and training with them can now trickle into the other teams as they share that with their fellow player and are able to help them deal with difficult situations. Second of all, there's a star factor that's associated with this diversification, right? These players who have been in high pressure match situations before, and you can tell them how to guide through. It's the fact that if you're in that situation yourself as a player with less experience, you're able to have that confidence that somebody else is with you, a star who can help pick up the game. Think about this way, right? Like for example, I feel less nervous when I'm speaking with Lucy because I know that she has more experience than me because she's a dino. Abena.
Things like analytics and medical facilities to make people better, you'd want to do this for the main team anyway. Once you invest in it for the main team, you can just roll this out without additional extra costs. So I'm not sure what the margin you're arguing for is.
No, the problem is that yes, maybe some 1-2 teams invest in it, but the majority do not because you can spend your way out of the problem. We demonstrated a comparative on this. Third, there's different ideas and coaching styles of people who are coming from different places. There's more players who might be able to get different pieces of advice and advice on playing styles that they previously were not able to get in ways that are able to maybe inspire them and teach them in ways that otherwise allow them to make a breakthrough. Different pieces of advice get through to different people. I think this is able to create a meaningful breakthrough for a lot of these people. This knowledge transfer is massive. You understand how to adapt to different situations the ways that you did before. Any of those can be the meaningful difference between a breakthrough. Increasing the volume of this knowledge is good. What does it do? First of all, a lot more money into these smaller teams, right? They have an attraction that they didn't before. There's a lot more of these star players that then trickle downward, or it's also that association of it. And now that you have another player who's maybe doing the excellent set pieces alongside the star, you create a new star by association. Second, they do well enough before they were seen as not having potential, not just the player, but the smaller clubs. They weren't seen as being worth their while as an investor. They were stagnant. And now you're willing to put money into them because they win more or they get closer to winning. The margins of the games get smaller. There's more even possession between them. And that is how you're able to get far more exciting games and far more stars made on our side of the house.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that excellent speech. I'll call upon the member.
I'm firstly going to explain why this irreparably screws over disadvantaged countries, and secondly, why this is a morally unacceptable policy. Firstly, why this screws over disadvantaged countries. And I do want to note that, DLO spends about 15 seconds at the end of that speech, explaining why this might be bad for disadvantaged countries. This argument is actually going to prove it and reach the burden that you would require to believe the argument is true. The first thing I want to claim is that teams often have maximized incentives to have domestic players on their starting lineup anyway, for all the reasons that opening government talk about. That fans are deeply nationalistic. They care about patriotism, the relatability of their players, the narrative that these people are just like us, of national pride. And so obviously, teams and football managers have maximized commercial incentives to have a lot of domestic players anyway, but also I would note it tends to just be easier and cheaper to draw from a local pool. So you don't have to pay for all of to import someone, fly someone in constantly, or to go through all of the administrative hassle of getting in a foreign player and trying to make their visa go through faster. And so that explains why there is zero delta on the incentives of teams to have domestic players on the starting lineup. So the question I want to ask is, why would teams choose not to meet this requirement already? The answer from closing opposition is when they lack the capacity to meet that requirement. That is to say, their only option is to have players from elsewhere. Why would this lack of capacity exist? Firstly, because they have relatively limited resources to train local talent. OG says the alternative is things like investment in academies and scholarships, But note that the vast majority of leagues in Europe that are outside of the UK, France, and Germany do lack the capacity to do things like widespread investment into academies, which are extraordinarily expensive, which require things like building up football pitches, building stadiums, of having things that are really, really expensive. But secondly, because these countries just have comparatively less history and institutional experience. That is to say that they're a country that has discovered football recently, that hasn't had their time in the sun yet, which means that they are unlikely to have a pool of talented players, local talented players they can already draw from. So how do they solve this? They go around this lack of capacity. They do so by importing good players from overseas. And note, it is a big cost. It is a big cost, and I would say maybe it's probably less than the amount that training would cost. But of course, it's pretty expensive. But this difference is that the benefits that you would receive are relatively more immediate. How do they get benefits from importing players? Firstly, because they get more success. I would note that football is a game that is often played on the margins. You only need 1 or 2 more goals a game in order to win, which means that if you import just 1 or 2 more players from overseas, or extra players from overseas that are really, really good, it means that you are able to win more games. You win more titles, you get more prize money, etc. But secondly, you can convince investors to put more money into your team and allow you to develop into the future because there is more immediate likelihood of payoff. You get more private investment from the Saudi, aristocrats they want to talk about, but also from your local government, who in many instances are a very significant source of revenue. They are more likely to put money into your team and to invest in development if they think there is more likelihood of immediate payoff. But thirdly, you get far more viewership if you believe the first 2 prongs of this analysis, which because they get more success and blah 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 blah. So the alternative prop like Gov Bench is basically investment in training local talent. This, on the comparative, is the far inferior option. The reason why, crucially, is because what these teams that are constrained in capacity need is immediate success and immediate injection of capital, because that is the crucial prerequisite for long-term improvement. You cannot get off the ground to begin with. You cannot do the kinds of academies and scholarships they want to talk about if you don't have a starting point of capital. The comparative is training, which is far more long-term because you need to train up people over the course of many years. Secondly, it is far more speculative because you do not know whether your investments are actually going to pay off. And OG is well, the UK and France can probably do this because Middle Eastern billionaires have endless pools of money. But obviously, we're not just talking about those countries, right? And CG, I would also note, just assume capacity exists to begin with. But what about countries like leagues in Latvia, and places like Bulgaria, where this investment probably exists to a lower extent than the countries that they want to talk about? This is the only way they can dig business out of the problem. The impact is that there is only an avenue for long-term development on the outside of the house. And we would co-opt all of the benefits of opening government in terms of development, because it is extraordinarily important that these countries actually do develop, that they're able to, for example, have the money to fund amateur and second and third rate leagues in order to actually do things like school programs for kids and encourage more people to play football. No, this means that not only the country does better on a global stage, but all of these benefits trickle down, which is extremely valuable for fans and would-be amateurs. Opening government preempt this and say they don't care if there's more inequality between countries. Firstly, they say because it's just a matter of utility, but obviously if you believe that these countries are the ones that would benefit the most, there's the most amount of marginal utility here. And secondly, they say there's inter-year fluctuation, which is completely asserted. Obviously, you have more equality on the outside of the house. Just saying there is fluctuation is not sufficient to preempt this. Before I go on, opening.
Yeah, so at worst, the Latvian league is slightly worse, and inter-year fluctuation does happen because of randomness in sport. Why do they need to do stuff in the short term and spend millions on foreign players but can't be pushed to invest in training with a nudge, which does pay off in 2 or 3 years?
That was my argument, right? I literally spent 5.5 minutes of my speech explaining why that's the case, and there is a meaningful comparative. Please look at your notes. When this against opening opposition, firstly, this is far more concrete than their impacts on fun and synergy, which I don't fucking know what that means. But secondly, they clearly just want to marginalize this debate out of existence. We actually shoot for a big impact. That's pretty cool. Second argument, this is morally unacceptable. PM says all rules are arbitrary, but obviously they can have morally unacceptable consequences. Just because you chose to have one rule over another doesn't mean they're both morally acceptable. And the reason why this is unacceptable, because it's literally discriminatory. The upshot of the policy is, for every domestic player that you now hire, you have to necessarily not hire a foreign player in order for government to get any of the benefits. And the reason why this is unacceptable is because we believe on a principled level that your prospects and opportunities in life should be fair. That is, reliant solely on your own skills and abilities, regardless of morally arbitrary factors like the class in which you were born or the geographical area in which you were born. But your country at birth is completely arbitrary from a moral point of view. You did not choose to be born in that country, and so it is unacceptable for you to be locked out of an opportunity simply on that basis. If private companies did this, which I guess like football clubs are, right? Or if schools did this, we'd be fucking outraged. It'd be the first argument you'd run this debate because it would obviously be morally unacceptable. I have no idea why people don't care more about this, right? This is discriminatory, and they might say, well, who cares? They're probably rich anyway. The point is that this is morally repugnant. It is regardless of who this affects. Even if this affects the richest of players, it is unacceptable. This is in and of itself important, but if you don't believe in principles, if you're unclear on the practical question top up, it should be a tiebreaker anyway. Vote closing opposition.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that excellent speech and call upon the last speaker from the proposition.
First responding to the CEO claim, then some external button or then we'll talk about development and last we'll talk about interlife leaks. First response is to closing off. Their case is that there's disadvantaged countries who do not have enough money to have 5 domestic players on the pitch, and their solution is that they're going to go and buy foreign stars that can help these countries develop. I'm just like, these are countries that then don't have pitches, they don't have money to build amateur leagues. And they will buy foreign stars that are going to get them up. That's so much more expensive. If you don't have 5 players that can play on your pitch, how will you attract or how will you buy those foreign stars? Like building a stadium, admittedly, like in countries like Slovenia, there isn't football league. You might have quite small stadiums. I know they're expensive to build, like a picture of grass and you put some chairs around it. You start some professional players and they still develop and improve. And like it's a lower quality league, yes. But as it grows, you can make it bigger. I don't know how they're getting the money to buy the foreign stars. But also, why would the foreign star go in? Like this foreign Brazilian is going to go to an infant Latvian league that doesn't have enough money to have amateur pitches. This makes no sense. But also, say that they can. Say that this is the choice that they are making. Like they might buy some nice foreign players or try to put this money into developing academics or put that is cheaper. Like this is obviously a much more risky decision, right? If you are investing that money into a star player and that star player tanks it and doesn't make you improve, that's a sunk cost. While if you are putting that money into development of the academies of the players, then obviously that thing still stands. The final thing about morality, I don't know, I think we do this constantly. We do quotas in companies, we do quotas in schools. We are doing schools like schools have to take people from the area that they are living in. I think that the clubs are located in a certain city, in a certain country, I think that's probably more priority to be putting them in. Secondly, on some of the bits from opening up. On the whole thing about lineup, I would note that the fact that you are needing to sub some players in doesn't mean that you still don't have loads of bench players, right? Like Manchester United will have loads of players, maybe 4 or 5 of them will be regularly being subbing in. The rest of them are in fact just warming benches. But even if there is some kind of quotas, if you contest for like domestic players that are on the bench, I would say it's an argument for our side, right? Because right now you just incentivize them to buy domestic players and then bench them and let them sit there. That they're spending the prime of their career not being able to play because they are locked into that. On our side, we're actually letting them play before they should have sale. The second thing is like the small thing that they end up having about like players are going to be forced to play when injured and it's going to be really bad. That is silly. Obviously, just streamline your reserves. You just have more reserves from domestic players. There's no incentive to be letting injured players play because then they get injured even more. And that we have out of 2 weeks, you have 1 year off out. Let's talk about more money in development. Opening up a note, so there might be an incentive now to put money into development of academies, etc. The issue is that they don't explain why this incentive does not exist under the status quo. Opening opposition correctly points it out, to which XK gives a quite weak response, which is yes, this incentive exists, but now we have a bit more of this incentive. Baji explains why this incentive actually does not exist on their side of the house and why we are creating it specifically where it matters. The way for this is simple because opening government has a marginal improvement at best. We are actually explaining why the impact is large. We agree that there are weaker teams in leagues that already have lots of domestic players, and that money is being invested into academies around those clubs. The problem is that the largest clubs, the ones with the large owners, with the most money that will be invested into those things, do not do it. And I just like Abhinav just said that Proben shared one article on Newcastle. Man City has all money, Newcastle has all money, PSG has all money, Manchester United has Glazers out with them. All of those teams, loads of those large teams are having rich owners. The only exception is the one thing that they point out, which is Barcelona invests into academies. That's the one club that is fan owned. So, given that, Vachi explains why these clubs, who are currently mostly formed by foreign players, do not currently have the incentive to be investing into academies. We explain why there is always a trade-off, why the short-term incentives are mean that this money is never being poured into academics. I'm not going to rehash the points. I trust that it was read out.
In your earlier rebuttal, you literally conceded you need good domestic players on the bench that you can sub in case of injury. So what exactly is the marginal change here?
No, I did not say that. I said that right now, this changes now, right? Now you need to have domestic players that you can sub in case of the other domestic player that you are required to have on the squad gets injured. What I'm saying now is that you have large reserves. 4 of them are playing, those tend to be the foreign ones, and then the domestic people who are just being sitting and moving the benches. What this means then? This money from the rich owners who now get the incentive to be investing in the academies is being put there, or at worst, you are much more likely to be buying off domestic players from the weaker teams who already have the incentive to put in academies and now they have more money to do it. What is the importance of this argument? First, we are explaining why there's a large difference in development which beats opening government, headlines it, but never actually explains. But secondly, also responds to the old claim about domestic players are going to be expensive and then teams have less money. Because if the pool of the talent is broadening, then obviously this whole thing about the prices raising is not going to happen. The last thing that I want to talk about is about more equalized leagues. Opening opposition says that it's important to have players from different nationalities on the team because it needs to have a mixture of styles and nice team synergy. We agree, that's literally the point of our case. Opening on headlines, and check the notes, they really don't explain it, is that the talent pool is going to start shifting. But what happens is that right now, of course, players from Argentina, Brazil, everywhere else, they want to go to European leagues, like La Liga, like EPL, like Bundesliga. These are attractive leagues, they pay more money, they have a chance to play in Champions League and similar things that are important. Right now, the top 5, for example, in EPL, or Real Madrid and Barcelona, or Bundesliga, can buy off loads of these foreign stars. Now, these stars have an incentive to go to these leagues, but because there is no more incentive for just the big clubs to buy them because they don't want to be just benching them, and the players don't want their bench, then more of the clubs within those leagues are able to get those star players in. So you have the teams like Everton or teams like, West Ham, who currently have all many domestic players who have the ability to attract the foreign players because no longer the large clubs are able to buy all of them. What this means is this equalizes why all of these clubs have the ability to have some kind of star player in them. They get more viewership, they are able to sell more merch, they are able to attract more local fans. This is the actual argument for that. But secondly, this flips the argument of opening opposition because it means more teams are able to learn from the different playing styles within different countries. You have more of that team synergy and more of that more attractive play that people want to watch. For all those things that are
I'd like to thank the speaker for that excellent speech and call upon the last member of the
I'm first going to respond to the claim of where does this money come from, because I think CG is being deeply uncharitable given there only one response to our case. The first thing that I'd like to point out is that it is incredibly speculative when you are investing in a country or if you're a local government putting money into football fields, whether or not you're going to get a star player or someone who's super successful in the way in which competitive football players are in comparison to just buying off someone else. So while they might have the money to do so, it is unlikely that they're going to put that much money into it without the certainty of having someone who has a completed track record beforehand. Because building more things like more football fields or trying to hire better coaches, you don't know if you'll actually have the certainty of playing out when you have someone you can buy that has a completed track record. But secondly, even if you don't believe that, I think it is far more likely that investors are willing to pay out things like, oh, you can have a loan to buy this star player if you are interested in building up a football league within this countries, or are more likely to actually give money to these existing football leagues in these countries with the existence of a star player. So I think the claim of where does this money come from is deeply uncharitable, and it isn't actually responsive to the extension that Aiden gives you, because he explains that it is far more likely that people are going to either give out loans or just do any investment at all, or the government, which might have money, will have an increased incentive to put money into these football leagues with the existence of the certainty of a star player being there. But secondly, even if you don't believe that, I'll point out that CG literally gets no responses to our extension. There's one response to our first extension, and there's no responses to our second extension. And I think you should rate this incredibly highly, because the incentives of people investing in these Saudi aristocrats that the opening the teams want to talk about investing in these football teams is incredibly marginal. They probably want to invest in a lot of the football teams in wealthy countries that they talk about already. But we are the only these smaller countries that Aiden talks about, this is the only chance in which they're able to create a successful team. Because oftentimes you do not have the history required to have people that interested without some successes in these countries. You don't have lots and lots of football fields because lots of people don't play football when they grow up and then you get interested and become competitive players later. This is the only chance these countries have to have success. You should weigh that incredibly highly. But secondly, if you don't believe that, Aiden explains to you that it is deeply principally immoral. There is absolutely no explanation given as to why it is more fair for these domestic players to have this job rather than a foreign player that is losing this job. You think this is large principal harm, and you should weigh it very highly. And firstly, going to respond to CG. The first of the extension is that this creates more star talent within these fields. I'd just like to point out three things. Firstly, I think that oftentimes the infrastructure that they talk about only comes after you have the successful or star player. For example, if a team is able to buy someone who's super successful, it's not the coach they likely want to bring with them, or the sorts of facilities it takes to support them is likely to not go away for the rest of the team members, etc. So oftentimes it is unclear why this is actually the best way of creating star players. Oftentimes I actually think it is likely that the existence of someone super talented often brings in talent and then pushes the rest of the pool up. But secondly, oftentimes we think it is likely that greater talent is created when you are able to buy up these new players. For example, it just means you often get to play against different play styles, learn against other people. So it is a CG's extension, I think, at the end of this is incredibly unclear. Firstly, because I think the amount of extra super talented stars they get is incredibly marginal. Firstly, because I think the investors wanting to invest in these clubs it is largely stays the same, because when investors are investing, they either personal ties to these clubs, either just enjoy football in their country. So I think there's a large pool of money otherwise. But secondly, we think oftentimes the existence of these super successful foreign players is what means these clubs become more successful in the future, because they do pull in extra talent otherwise. Before I move on, OG.
Our policy levels Germany with Latvia more than now because it places limits on rich country teams' capacity to have all foreign starters, forcing investment into training, as CG repeats, including analytics.
Firstly, oftentimes, like Aiden already explained to you, there's a large amount of incentives for these people to pull from domestic pools anyway. But secondly, even if Latvia is not able to buy the best star player that Germany is able to buy, there are a lot of good football players out there. And Aiden explains to you that often at these times, these countries don't have any history of having a football league at all, don't have like many people that are that interested. So even if you are able to buy a player who is like quite successful, and is able to increase Latvia's success more. So if you're increasing Latvia's success from like not having like any football success at all, from being like a pretty good team, this is like important for these countries and a much larger change than they're able to suggest. But like, oh, maybe like you invest in local teams that you already have the incentive to invest in more, and it means that in these countries you are going to like, get more people interested in the country. So I think CG then is out of the debate because I think playing style talent is very marginal. Secondly, but lastly then, on OG. Firstly, I think on local development, I think this is something as already explained by Richard, you should weigh incredibly lowly. Because I don't think local development is something that changes that much on their side for two reasons. Oftentimes because people, rich investors, oftentimes like have oftentimes because rich investors have incentives separate from the most successful person investing in. For example, they like either like the team or if they're from the country are recognized. But secondly, and more importantly, on their claim about like rich teams buying out all this competition, I don't understand how this changes that much on their side because it just means they buy out most of the competition from the domestic country that they're talking about. So I think it is like incredibly like marginal how much interleague competition actually changes that much. And I think compared to our extension, where we are able to give countries that don't have a history of like football a chance, rates incredibly highly. Comparing against opening opposition, as already expressed, I think arguments about how much better already competitive teams that the opening teams want to talk about, oftentimes it is unclear how much this extra money is going to get these teams extra far, which is why our extension is the most important in this debate. Because even marginally better football players that these teams are able to get attracts investment and attracts interest in these countries. Not much of football history, which means that more people in these countries can enjoy the sport. More people who are already interested in like football in these countries are able to participate in a game that brings so much joy to many people around the world. And secondly, it means we protect foreign players from actually getting their jobs lost. It is unclear from any team in this debate why this is something we should trade off and why this is something that is fair and why it is better for domestic people to have these jobs are incredibly hard to oppose.